doing good is good for business is something that we've been talking about at WOHASU and the World Happiness Summit. We actually had a panel on this at the summit in March in Miami. And so I'm very grateful to have you here after, the incredible background you have with entrepreneurship and how you have transformed that into really a force for good and to have the vision early to see that they coincide, right? Doing good is a win-win. Something that is very challenging is to live in a world with zero-sum games, right? And it seems like leadership, whether it's government leadership or business leadership, has that mindset. So can you share a bit about how do you see doing good is good for business, and what are the challenges that leaders face and the obstacles to something that not only is it intuitive, but there's so much research showing that it's the right thing to do, even for the financial impact or productivity of an organization?
Thank you, Karen. You hear me well? It works out. Hi, good afternoon. I think you're very good in listening and sitting. So thank you for taking time. Also, this wonderful with Fred. So I start by saying, I've been living all over the place for 40 years, but I was born in Italy, and I'm very lucky because my father was an entrepreneur. My grandmother on my father's side was an entrepreneur. My grandfather actually was a lawyer in Venice. And at home, we always talked about the law, ethics, or business. So I actually grew up in that family, and some of you who may come from Italy know that actually 50, 60, 70 years ago, 100 years ago, when capitalism really flourished, it was actually much more rooted in the social and in the community, and not only here, but in many other countries. In fact, the word company means breaking bread together. So I learned this from Pope Francis a few years ago, and actually the first companies in the world were run by Franciscan fathers. And it's very interesting, they could not own the company, but they actually had to steward the company. So long story short, I actually set up a company with my father when I was in my early 20s. My father was in the chemicals business, and he got very concerned that the chemicals and the chemical industry in general was creating pollution, and there were scandals in Germany, in Italy. And we turned the company around into an environmental technology company, doing water testing, soil testing for checking the quality of water, reducing the use of fertilizers. And that was my kind of training ground. I did it for 13 years. I was running the company from London. And for me, actually, the answer is it was a normal thing to do. As an entrepreneur with the energy and wish to create something new, which I think is what entrepreneurship is about, that innovation, that creativity, with, say, your own values, your own aspirations in life, which I think for most people come from your family and the way you've been brought up, what your mother tells you. Generally, we all grow up in families where we grow up trying to be good people. So that for me was natural. Now, 40 years later, and also some of the things that I have done, I need to add two things. One is there are also studies that show that actually not only doing good is good for business. And actually, I was the other day in Amsterdam with a group of impact investors, and one of the speakers actually said, it is still very lucrative to do things that are not good and make money in business. So, and that some very simple statistics, the percentage of the economy that is in the hands of, say, the really sort of criminal, pornography and so on is 13%. And then there is another 11% of the economy which is actually money parked in tax havens. So we have 22% of the economy already. You couldn't say actually not very good economy, not very good for business. And then additionally, if you count some of the sectors, the industries that are really very extractive, that create a lot of negative externalities, that we get to 30, 40%. So it is still possible to actually do business and not do good. So that's what I keep actually having to press and be mindful of that reality. What is happening, I think, now is in the last, maybe 5 years, where this awareness of the climate situation in the world and, of course, inequalities, globalization that has kind of gone, become quite unmanageable. A lot of the young leaders, young entrepreneurs want to start businesses for good. That's also a bit the story of the B Corps. Generally speaking, many of the B Corps are run by people in their 30s and early 40s. So it's the younger the population, at the moment, the greater the awareness about how do you actually achieve positive impact with running a good company. And in the words of Paul Polman, one of our friends, CEO of Unilever, former CEO of Unilever, the real question is, how will the world be without your company? Or rather, how does your company contribute to the world that we live in? And then, we can continue the conversation. But so these are my two quick first answers, is that it's sort of natural for people to grow up in families where actually doing good is normal for human beings. Well, we listen to Fred, what he was saying, But then how do you combine this with business? So it's that kind of sort of ambidextrous leadership, is to do both. And that's actually not very easy. And maybe I'll say something later about it. And the second point I'm making is that actually not doing good can also be good for business.
I argue that in the shorter term, longer term, it has, I think, impacts on the society that perhaps could shrink your market. That I don't know but I understand your point, what you're saying. From your perspective, how has technology companies in particular, how have they embraced this idea or not embraced this idea of doing good as well? It seems like a lot of the conversation right now is in these entrepreneurs, and tech giants are talking a lot about profitability. And I think in last night's dinner, I heard something, I'm not going to say who it was, but that person said that it's not his job to be the moral police of the world. And I think that while it's not one individual's, I think it is all our responsibilities to be morally upstanding citizens of the world. And so in this tech conversation, what have you been seeing in the last decade has entrepreneurship changed?
Well, so a couple of things. One is that about 6 or 7 months ago, when the OpenAI conversation was taking place, well, it's still taking place, but there was a moment of inflection. We, meaning the B Corp movement in the world, wrote a letter in the New York Times suggesting that actually OpenAI should become a benefit corporation. So a benefit corporation, I think you asked me in your email. So let me say one or two things about B Corps and benefit corporations.
That was my next question, but yes, please do.
It's connected. It's connected with this. So I co-founded VLab Europe 2013 with one B Corp, and now 5,000 in Europe and 10,000 worldwide. But there's a second piece, which sometimes people don't know, which is that we also passed a legislation called the Benefit Corporation legislation. It first passed in the United States. It's now in 41 states. And then Italy was the next country that passed the legislation. Italy is called Società Benefit. There are 5,000 of these in Italy. Then France started the Entrepresa Mission, Spain, the Impresa con Proposito, and then there are other countries like Rwanda, of all places, British Columbia and Canada, Ecuador, Colombia. They also have the legislation. The legislation includes basically three things. One, you have to make your statement of purpose very clear. What are you in business for? Obviously not just profit, but what is your mission? What is your purpose? Secondly, you have to have a high level of transparency. So you can't hide things. You have to be very open about what's going on in your company. And thirdly, you have what is called stakeholder responsibility. So it's not only the shareholders, the stakeholders. Now, so OpenAI, and so we propose that OpenAI becomes a benefit corporation because by law, it's a legal document, you commit yourself to governing in the interest of the public. So now, obviously, OpenAI has not yet become a benefit corporation, but I think it is one of the answers to technology. And I know was Sandra was speaking this morning, and it's very clear to me that, of course, we always needed to have moral leadership. But given that the tools we have now are so much more powerful than we had before, we need to have even more moral leadership because we have amazing tools in our hands. And so I think that we need to govern this properly. And from our perspective, the world of B Corps, doing this within the legal framework in terms of the governance of the company, that is actually a very good way to do that. So we obviously would encourage that to happen. I was having a conversation at lunchtime, 30 years ago in Silicon Valley. It was actually at the beginning of the tech revolution, and there was a very alternative spirit, There was a very different moment, and everyone at that time was actually trying to create a better world. There was a humanistic kind of philosophy, and it got corrupted over the years. Money corrupts, and it's become what we know. Inside B Corps, there's clearly an attempt to work together to make AI work positively, positive impact. There are certain examples. There's one actually, a B Corp in Amsterdam called Ubuntu, with a double O at the end. It is actually an AI platform for companies to share what they're doing for the environment, for society. And it's a global platform. And there's more and more that is coming. So there is, perhaps we were a bit slow, given that people were a bit afraid of AI and it was dominated by the big players. But now I think there is a real moment where the B Corps are coming together to use AI properly. Final thing I say is, what was on this panel here with the lady from Milan and from Portugal. I mean, AI can be a fantastic tool, particularly I would say, and I have good friends in the UK, in the US that are working with governments. How do we use AI to serve our citizens? Because potentially it's a fantastic tool. You can actually reach millions of people. It's effective. It reduces the transaction costs. It does amazing things. But it's about how do we govern this very powerful technology that in a way we never had something so powerful, and it's obviously going to be increasing in terms of capacity. So we need to actually create the frameworks for good governance. And the benefit corporation can go all the way to a more cooperative structure where actually the owners are not just rich shareholders, but everyone in a company can be owning. We have amazing examples of B Corps that are a mining company in Colombia. You could think mining is not really sustainable, but it's owned by the cooperative. It's the people themselves own this mine, and it's their livelihoods, and they do everything they can to keep it, to make it sustainable. So the ownership and the governance is are very important attributes.
Absolutely. So it's transparency and policy. So last week, as I mentioned, we had our policy forum in London, and that you bring a very good point, because it could be that leaders would like to do the right thing, as it were, but then there's also the pressure of the shareholders or of the market. But if we have the policies in place, that you have to, in a way, you have to, abide by what the B Corps movement stands by, then it would be easier for leaders to do the right thing.
I mean, the real problem is what we call the financialization of the economy. It's basically distant shareholders who don't even know what's going on in the company. They only look at the numbers, and if it's high, you keep. If you're low, you sell your share. I mean, speculation is not really even finance, and that's also partly why in many countries, we recently organized a big meeting in Central America. Lots of family businesses, they think differently than businesses that are on the stock market, and that's also partly the reality of many economies. The SMEs, family businesses, they are a little bit more detached from this cutthroat competition that is generated by the financial market, but intermediaries. So I think actually that's one of the big problems, that a lot of the money has gone away from the real economy into speculation. Many banks don't even lend money to SMEs anymore. So it's actually quite dramatic how money has become a game of speculation. I think the numbers show that the overall amount of money in the world, only about 20% goes into the real economy. The rest is speculation.
And the value of money also is completely different. Now we're talking trillions, and a billionaire is a common thing. And so I think we have kind of desensitized, at least in the United States. I'm talking about the perspective of the United States, and I live in Miami, and that the city has really really become quite expensive. And it's so interesting to live in a time where things are almost getting out of control with how the economy or how finances are changing. What can we do from a people here, people who are listening to this? What can we do also from a bottom up perspective? How should we demand maybe the people who we elect or the companies we work for? How can we drive this change as well, to demand in the way that perhaps if our cities would be polluted, we had a cloud outside, we can't breathe, but we're having this situation, that is there, impervious, but we perhaps are not so, we feel something, but we're not so aware how to tackle it. Do you have any suggestions?
Well, I mean, I think that so one of the things that I did after B Corps is create it's a movement called for good leaders, movement for good leaders, which is about 10,000 people around the world. We meet, in big summits, small meetings. Last week we had a meeting, 45 of us went to see the Pope and Schwarzenegger of all people. There was a gathering at the Vatican about climate. And the reason why we wanted to do this is because actually companies are anonymous things, It's actually people inside companies who make the decisions. So at the end, if you get to people, that's how you get to the raw materials of how you will decide. So I think the answer to your question is we need to mobilize many more leaders, many more people to it's a mix of having more courage, taking responsibility, working with each other. Actually, leadership is togetherness. One of the things I learned over the years that if you really think we are together, you're never alone, even if you are a CEO of a company and so on. So that togetherness is very important. So we need to mobilize people to. Secondly, everywhere in the world there are public registry or who is a corporate director. Australia, Singapore, the US, everywhere. And there are, we did a kind of quick count. There are millions of corporate directors, if you can imagine. There are 350 million companies in the world. So everyone who is a corporate director actually has relatively limited responsibilities, but this can grow over time. This is one of the movements that we are, one of the policies changes we are working on is actually how do you create a new contract with corporate directors. Many of them are also owners of companies. So these are the things you can do. And it's connected with a work of people like Emmanuel Faber, chairman of the ISSB, which is changing the accounting profession. So what do we account for? So this is a very big thing, what do we measure? How do we measure profit of companies? Do we include externalities or we don't? So you can work with individuals, you can work with policies. And then I think that what Sandro brought up this morning is really very important, that, we don't spend time on things like moral leadership. Some years ago, some of us went to Bhutan. In Bhutan, if you want to be a politician, you have to spend 1 year in a monastery. So get your act together, understand. And I mean, I don't mean everyone should go to a monastery, but the point is the reflection and being prepared for these decisions that influence the lives of millions. So we need to do much more of that, kind of moral leadership, which start at school, Sandro, you were saying it this morning, start early, If you look at the students, they don't do very much of that now. So how do we prepare our leaders? And then the final thing that, when you become a doctor, you have to sign a Hippocratic oath. So we would like leaders to also sign a Hippocratic oath. Basically, they are there to serve their community, their society. So there are lots of things you can do. And that's also, by the way, one of the advantages of AI, that we could really reach hundreds of millions of people through the systems we have. And that's a little bit what we want to do. We're moving in that direction, trying to do
how
that.
can people get involved with that partnership with
for good leaders,
yes,
a cooperative,
for good leaders.
Normally we invite people on the basis of credibility and track record. Obviously we don't want greenwashing and so on. But of course, if people come forward
and reach
they
out
ask us,
in the website.
we have a kind of very simple peer structure. So 2 people have to recommend someone or approve someone, and then we go like that. That's it. Yeah, and I think that we find that this is a big thing. I made a note. Uh, One of the projects we are working on is transforming business school education.
That's what I was going
It's
to
a
ask
really
you
big
next.
problem because
Yes.
in business schools you generally don't learn any of this stuff. You know, actually it's the opposite. It's profit maximization. It is, you know, the ideology, and there are 10,000 business schools around the world, and there's 40 million business school graduates every year, and most of them, with a few exceptions, still ingrained with the idea profit maximization, blah blah. So it's a big issue, and you know, in fact, you know, business schools are quite new. You know, they started. You know, Harvard Business School started what, maybe less than 100 years ago. And before that, we didn't have the kind of strong ideology of the neoliberal paradigm, you know, Milton Friedman and so forth. So, reforming the way we educate business school leaders and business school managers that go to business school is very important.
I totally agree. During the pandemic, actually, I did my MBA at Georgetown Business School, and I led, I think we did 6 master classes to the business school, to the students, talking about happiness. During that time, that was very challenging because uh, everybody was communicating on social distancing, when in really it's not social distancing, it's physical distancing. So people were feeling very, of course, isolated and scared. And I think there's fear now, but in a different way. And definitely, you know, educating people in business and the ethical business and philosophy. And I think that's why, you know, if you think about 150 years ago, 200, 300 years ago, you had a philosopher, you had an artist. I've talked to people that they say we should have a chief artistic officer, to have an artist to help us think in different ways. um, and that is innovation. I mean, it's also, it's like Fred was saying, you know, to have different perspectives so we can see the totality of how a business should grow. Before we end, Marcello, what would be your recommendation? There are a lot of entrepreneurs here and some students even who will hope to be entrepreneurs. How can we begin this journey for the company from the beginning? Because what we see also is that founders have a problem with their mental health and their well-being, because as a founder you work so much, and you have the pressures of making the business financially viable, otherwise you're out of business. But how can we make a paradigm that what you're doing behind Good Leaders and also the B Corps is essential to creating a business as is the financials?
So I mean, there are different answers to the question, but one that was uh, shared by Victoria this morning, the story of Dove, so powerful because you see, this is the ambidextrous approach. So on the one hand, you have to be a good entrepreneur. You have to know what you're doing. And it's not always the case. Huh? There are people who think they are, but they are not. And on the other hand, you have to be a very good human. And you have to, I mean, you don't have to be the Pope, but you have to have that kind of it's an open-mindedness towards others, towards society, towards the needs of people. And if you can combine those two, then your Dove is the example. I mean, it's amazing because they don't only sell good products, but they also have it's a multiplier effect. And that's also the biggest power of business is actually everyone except, you know, people who may work in government. So I say 60% of people work in business, work in companies. And they also we spend all our time, you know, like, you know, most of our lives is spent working. So that's the real big power. If you just start changes, they don't have to be amazing changes, but just every day or every month a small change in the world of business, you can really make a fantastic difference. So the answer that I was referring to is it's this kind of ambidextrous. Uh, and that's part of education. That's partly also what, of course, can be done in companies. So companies themselves can do that. I mean, I remember, you know, I mentioned to you, Victoria, the example of Ben Cohen, Ben and Jerry. You know, I met him in the lift in Atlanta 30 years ago, and that was for me still an example. How can you actually combine a social mind, a environmental mind with the business mind? You know, so it's that kind of, and it reflects what you said. I think it's very, very important what you said just now, that in a way, it's a bit like we've been shrinking our mind. We've been it's a reductionistic development. Instead of being wider and thinking about philosophy and ecology, spirituality, the wider capacity of the human brains, we've been going down to accounting, bean counting, and we need to get back into that kind of much wider. So it can start at school, and companies can do that. I mean, many of the B Corps, like Patagonia, if you've read the book, I Let My People Go Surfing, this is the word of Yvon Chouinard, so you can create a culture that is actually encouraging the sort of ambidextrous practice. So it's not easy, but if you look forward the next 10, 20, 30 years, if you are a young entrepreneur, I mean, there's no other way to go. Because if we continue the way we've been going, we're going to have nothing left. There's been no planet left and no nature left. So, I would have hoped we didn't have to come so far, but we are here now. So now, obviously, we have to wake up and see that if we don't change, then really we are going to be in for civilizational disaster. It would be I'm not apocalyptic, but I think that we face very big dangers.
To wake up.
And the final word I want to say is that we've never had such potential, in terms of knowledge, human intelligence, artificial intelligence, connectivity or connectivity. We can mobilize people from around the world. So that's the kind of paradox. We have such potential to do much better for the world. So that's why we should be using it. So because the time is running out, in close, I want to just say one thing that still kind of gives me goose pimples, but I read it somewhere and I want to say that, and the quote is, at the end of life, the person you will become will meet the person you could have been. So at the end of life, so at the end, who do you want to be? It's what Fred was saying earlier.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.